there's the cranial sea. So the brain, is that the right way up? Okay. Trying to see if I've got it the right way up, as if you could get it upside down. So notice, now the pictures didn't come out very well when I looked at the video last time, so hopefully you can actually see it. But the brain cells aren't close together. They're joined through tentacles to each other. They're like starfish and sea anemones and little weird fish and stuff. It's a fluid environment. This brain is 90% water, and the cranial sea in it is 99% water. And the cranial sea can just flow through these cells. There's nothing to stop it. If there's a tide to it, it can just flow through it. And here we have the edge of a ventricle. Now, the difference between the ventricle and here is the ventricle doesn't have all of these cells in it. So the ventricle is just cranial sea. And they're both. The cranial sea that's produced in the ventricles is exactly the same as the cranial sea produced in the body. They're 99% water. Now there is quite a big difference though, in that it is food. Cranial sea is food. It's oxygen and glucose. The glial cells take the oxygen and glucose into themselves, and it's their fuel, it's the breath and fuel for the cells. There's a chemical reaction. The glucose and oxygen come together, and whatever the reaction is happens and gives life and energy, and it produces carbon dioxide. And this will go back via the venous blood or the cranial lymph, which I'm going to explain in a bit how the cranial lymph works. So in this area it will be water, oxygen, glucose and also salt, and carbon dioxide. And for me that does just flow across into here. So this will start off as just not having carbon dioxide, but there's a migration into the ventricles. Okay, so that's the cranial sea. So the whole area is water in a way and fluid. And maybe it's not the best one to show, but it's the one to hand. The ventricles, you've got either hemisphere of the brain, you've got two lateral ventricles, and these wrap around the thalamus, and then you have the whole cerebrum here, and then in the middle of the thalamus you've got the third ventricle, and then coming down the brain stem you've got the fourth ventricle, and then that continues on down the spine. And this is the cerebrum, this is the cerebellum, this is the pons and the brain stem, and that becomes the spine. And this is all fluid, all cranial sea, the whole lot. And the ventricles are just cranial sea because there's no cells in the ventricles. And around the whole brain there's cranial fluid, and around the whole spine. I might as well show you that. Here it is coming. So you've got it, this is from the back, this is the cerebellum, you've got the cranial sea around the cerebellum and in the cerebellum, and then around the spinal cord. You can see all the nerves at the end of the spine. They all just, it's just nerves. For the last third of the spine and down it's the dural tube around it, and these are all nerves, and the nerves just spread out, and the cranial fluid flows down the nerves. All right, anyway, we're going to carry on, and I'm going to just show a central principle that I want to explain. Now, in the body, the arterial blood, this is this red bit, the arterial blood flows out through the whole body, through the capillaries, goes out of the capillaries as nourishment for the cells. The cells create carbon dioxide, and that fluid flows back through the venous blood. So a lot of pressure in the arterial blood. There's 10 times as much pressure in the arterial blood as there is in the venous blood, because it's going through, I don't know how many, over 1,000 miles of capillary. I think it's 60,000 miles of blood vessels through the whole body, and I think it's 45,000 miles of capillaries. So the pressure goes right down, and there's 1/10 of the pressure in the venous blood coming back. So the venous blood is going very slowly, the arterial blood is going fast, so the venous blood can't take back all of the blood flow to the heart. And the rest of that fluid, this fluid in the middle, is the lymph, and that gets brought back through the lymph to the heart, because the venous blood can't take it all. The lymph is moving much slower. There's 4 times as much lymph traveling back to the heart as either the volume of the, kind of in space-wise, the volume of the venous blood or the arterial blood. It's a big volume. The same dynamics are true in the brain and the nervous system. The arterial blood is coming very quickly. The venous blood is leaving very slowly. It can't take all of the fluid, and the rest is cranial lymph. In the traditional picture of how this is shown, how the fluids of the brain is shown, they've got no explanation to where this cranial lymph goes. They, in a way, they just deny its existence. So the picture you look at as of the cranial fluid, it does not take into this amount of cranial C getting back to the heart. It just doesn't account for it. It doesn't show it. It doesn't say, we don't know where that goes, but it's somewhere. It's just ignored. So in the picture that I'm showing, it's not ignored. So you've got the whole cranial C for the whole brain nervous system. You've got the arterial blood coming to it fast and strong, and that is producing the cranial C. Some of that cranial C with the carbon dioxides and toxins come back through the venous blood, and then it leaves that whole body of cranial lymph. The only place, you've got blood vessels and venous blood vessels coming and leaving, the only place for that lymph to leave is either through the nerves, which are open passages for it to leave, or out through the dura around the brain and spinal cord. Now the dura is a thick membrane, so some will go out through that, but it's mainly going out through the nerves. So what you become in contact with as the fluid is flowing out through the nerves, you become aware of the eliminative possibilities of the brain, because the fluid flowing out through the nerves is mainly this cranial lymph. So as soon as you're feeling that, it gives you this whole way for the brain to eliminate. Now when you're holding it all inside so that it can't come out through the nerves, you're denying the possibility of cranial lymph. And that picture you see of the central nervous system all sealed within the dura and not flowing out, that is denying the possibility of cranial lymph. It is saying that all of the fluid to the brain arrives in the capillary, in the arteries, and all of the fluid leaving the central nervous system is leaving in the veins, which is ludicrous and a lie. By allowing yourself to feel it going out through the nerves, you automatically are tuning into and becoming aware of that lymph, and you have an experience of your brain and your nervous system being able to detoxify. That is one of the reasons it feels so good to feel that flowing out through the nerves. And also the experience I had of the Lyme's disease getting better, when I was just feeling the fluid around the brain and in the ventricles and not flowing out, it wasn't even in contact with the glial cells or the toxins within the brain. So one, you move into the brain, you've got all of this extra fluid and the toxins are in it, then you can feel it flowing out through the nerves, and suddenly you get one, a massive amount of more fluid, but also you get the experience of your brain and nervous system having a lymph system and being able to detoxify and breathe. That is why it's so important to let it flow out through the nerves. Also, the whole perception of cranial flow changes, because basically you've got all of this area and the blood is coming, the venous blood is leaving, and then you've got this whole body of fluid, the cranial lymph. Its exit is the nerves. So from the whole brain, that whole cranial lymph is moving towards the exit, is moving towards the nerves. So the cerebrum, the top of the brain, there's no nerves in that, and the cerebrum's 80% of your whole nervous, or of the central nervous system. It's 85% of it, and there's no nerves there. So all of that cranial lymph is making its way through there's a tentorium, there's a membrane splitting the cerebrum from the cerebellum and brainstem. It's all making its way to the hole in the tentorium to drop down where all the cranial nerves are, so it can go out through the cranial nerves. And then you've got the cerebellum and the brainstem again. Blood is coming to that, venous blood is leaving, and there's cranial C that's moving towards the nerves. Now it can't all come out through the cranial nerves, travels down through the spine and moves out through the nerves in the spine, and then you get right to the bottom of the spinal cord, and it's all nerves. So this gives a massive surface area for all of the fluid to flow into the nerves and flow out down through the legs and lower body. So, and at the top of the head there's no pressure. This is a body, a vertical body. If you think of a toilet, a flushing toilet, notice how much pressure pushes that through. And that's only 18 inches to get that. Now, from the top of the head to the bottom of the spine, that's double that. So there's no pressure here, and the further it gets down, there's more pressure that gives it an impetus to flow out through the nerves. Nature and gravity does it for you. So it just makes the flow very simple. The flow of cranial fluid is the cranial lymph moving towards the nerves, and the further down it gets, the more nerves there are, and the further down it gets, the higher the pressure is. So it works with nature, and it makes everything simple. It's just this gentle flow out. Let's just show some pictures. So we're going to go over time, so hopefully people can hang around. I didn't really have time for the questions, I think. So you have the tentorium splitting the brain here, through this area here. So all of the fluid from this top part is flowing to a hole in the tentorium here, and it flows down, and the ventricles receive that cranial C flowing into the ventricles, these ones around the thalamus. And I'm not sure if this is too complicated. It's quite, I'm going to do this generally. I'm not going to show all the anatomy. The anatomy is in the pictures. If you want to read up on the anatomy, just look at the pictures and stories I gave you. So you've got all of this cranial fluid going to the hole through the tentorium. And then as it gets closer, you've got the ventricles, and it naturally, the ventricles become spaces to hold this cranial fluid C, or cranial lymph, as it moves into the ventricles. And then wrapped around the thalamus in the ventricles, you have the choroid plexus. The choroid plexus produces cranial C, but it also receives cranial lymph. It gives out cranial C, and it receives carbon dioxide and toxins and fluid from the cranial C. So this is different to how it's pictured in the anatomy books, and I may be wrong, but this is my experience of it. All of that cranial lymph is flowing in, flows into the ventricles, it flows to the center of the ventricles, the choroid plexus filters out the carbon dioxide, filters out the toxins, and then produces oxygen and glucose, and the flow is inwards. It just continues into the thalamus. So in the middle you've got the thalamus and all of that new oxygen. So this is the center of your brain. It's the center command module. It doesn't want all of that carbon dioxide. It wants nutriments, it wants oxygen. So the choroid plexus filters out the carbon dioxide, filters out the toxins, produces the food for the thalamus. This flows directly into the thalamus and also flows through the ventricles into the third ventricle inside the thalamus. And inside the thalamus you have the pineal gland, you have the pituitary gland, you have the hypothalamus, and you have the inside of the thalamus. Let's just look at a picture of that, just so you can see a picture. Okay. Actually, there's inside the third ventricle at the top there. I can't see it, but I think that's the pituitary gland. This is the hypothalamus, all those different colours. I can't see. There's the pineal glands over here. So this is a central control panel, and all of that oxygen, all of that glucose is food for that. I just want to show another picture that's easier to see. Okay, so the lateral ventricle. Now these, I drew this before I realised it's connected, or I knew it's connected to the thalamus, but I wasn't good enough painter to do it all the way around. But the lateral ventricles wrap around the thalamus, and then that on the inside of them you've got the choroid plexus that's part of the thalamus, and that filters out all of the carbon dioxide, and then the glucose travels in, and some of it flows into the center of the thalamus, this third ventricle, and then flows down into the fourth ventricle, and you have all of the cranial nerves that backs onto there. So we're going to do a meditation. Let me check the time. So this is a way you can come in contact with that central command module, the center of your brain. You can let all of the toxins come out. You can let it be fed with glucose, with oxygen. This is the way it happens everywhere else in the body. Wherever the oxygen and nutriments are produced, they come out of the blood, they're used instantly, they flow back into the venous blood and go off in the lymph. And it's the same with the corid plexus. The oxygen, the glucose comes out. It's used for food. It is food. Cranial C, not only is it for energy to move through, it is food and breath for the cells, and it comes out. The glial cells are there waiting. They eat the oxygen, they eat the glucose, they breathe the oxygen, they produce carbon dioxide. So, sorry I'm rushing a bit because I know I've got left behind a bit. So we're going to start with this area. We're going to feel that cranial C moving towards the center, and then the corid plexus filtering out all of the carbon dioxide and then producing nutriments that will go into the center, into the thalamus, flow into the third ventricle, inside the thalamus, all the pituitary glands, all of those workings, then come down into the brain stem, and there's more corid plexus that will feed out through all the cranial nerves. Then it will flow down through the spine, spread out through the whole body, and you'll notice the relief as it flows out through the nerves, because this is finally that cranial lymph flowing out, and the toxins of the cranial lymph being able to release out through the body, and then that releases out through the nerves, taken up by the body's normal lymph, and then that gets taken out by the kidneys, the liver, or back to the heart. But the body takes those toxins, takes that carbon dioxide and eliminates it, and then gives a new batch of new blood to the brain, and the circle starts again. So I'm sorry I can't give time for any questions, but we're just going to go into that meditation. So time to close your eyes and drop into the holographic breathing. Notice how easy the holographic breathing starts. The lips are relaxed and closed, the tongue is relaxed and on the roof of the mouth. On the in-breath, the jaw is relaxing open. On the out-breath, the jaw is relaxing closed. Notice how you get this deeper breath moving through your whole body, this energy moving through your whole body. And also feeling the sideways motion of the breath, the body opening to the sides, the body closing to the sides, and the sides of the cranium opening on the in-breath, closing on the out-breath. And it's a whole sea. It's the ventricles. Well, let's start with the ventricles. You've got the fluid around the brain, the fluid around the spine. Breathing, then you can drop into the ventricles inside the brain. Breathing, and notice how that feels on its own. And then let it become the cranial sea. Include the whole inside of the brain, the whole inside of the spinal cord. Allow that to breathe, and now let that flow off down through the cranial nerves, through the periphery nerves, through the spinal nerves. Notice how nice that feels, and notice how that gives you a feeling of allowing the brain to breathe, allowing the brain to eliminate as that fluid, because this is the cranial lymph flowing off down through the nerves. Get this sideways breath and allow the whole brain, the whole spinal cord to be fluid, and allow that fluid to flow out through the nerves. And as soon as it flows through the nerves, you feel this elimination quality. You're allowing the elimination of the cranial lymph. Again, I'm feeling it in my neck. Relax your neck. Let those vertebrae relax. Let the cranial sea flow out through the nerves in the neck. Yeah, it's the energy. Let the energy. Let the energy from your pelvic floor, from the genitalia, rise up. Let it go through your neck. So people are holding on to their kundalini. Let your neck relax. Let the cranial, the energies flow through the neck and spine there. That's it. Let that go. This feels more like a kundalini than a cranial sea webinar. Just keep letting your pelvis relax, letting the pelvis energies release up through the spine, through the neck, through the throat, through the brain. It will feed your brain, connect to the higher energies. And feeling this cranial sea flowing towards the center of the cerebrum, the top half of the brain. This is the major part of the brain, flowing inwardly towards the thalamus, just very slowly. And around the thalamus in the middle you have the ventricles, and this cranial sea flows into the ventricles. This is carrying carbon dioxide. And then around the thalamus and the center of the ventricles is the coryplexus, and this cranial lymph flows through the coryplexus like layers of seaweed, and it takes out the carbon dioxide, it takes out the toxins, and it gives out oxygen, it gives out glucose, it gives out salt, and these flow into the thalamus, and this rich cranial sea flows into the body of the thalamus and starts feeding the thalamus. And where the ventricles and coryplexus, they come into the top of the third ventricle in the middle of the thalamus, and this rich cranial sea flows into the third ventricle in the center of your thalamus. So you've got your whole thalamus being fed by energy, by oxygen, by glucose, by fluid, light, energy and food. And let that go into the thalamus, let the thalamus breathe. White light in the center of your brain. And then after a while this releases down into the brain stem, below the tentorium, and you feel your cerebellum, the back of your head. This is the cerebellum, breathing, feeling your cerebellum, and the fluid cranial lymph from the cerebellum is flowing forwards to this big wide ventricle in the brainstem. And as it flows into the fourth ventricle in the brainstem, this is full of coryplexus. Coryplexus filters out all of the carbon dioxide and fills the whole area with oxygen and glucose, and this flows forwards into the pons in the front of the brainstem and into the cranial nerves, and becomes food for the nerves as they flow out. And you get the cranial lymph and the cranial fluid flowing out, feeding the cranial nerves through the face and through the body. Notice you can sit back into your cerebellum. You can feel this fluid flowing forwards and this light into the pons, into the cranial nerves. And these are flowing out. You've got the vagus nerve, you've got all the nerves through your face, cranium. Again, this is releasing in the cervical spine, allowing your cervical spine to release. This also travels down the spinal cord. You've got the cranial sea flowing down around the spinal cord, through the spinal cord, through the center of the spinal cord, and the spinal cord is creating cranial sea, allowing the cranial sea to flow out through the nerves. Allow that to adjust your spine. And it flows down your spine and keeps releasing out through the nerves. Remember to do holographic breathing. And the bottom third of the spine is just nerves, the long nerves full of cranial sea. And they're already full of cranial sea, and as they flow out through the dura, there's nothing to stop that cranial sea carrying on. Allow that. It flows into your abdomen, it flows through your genitalia, flows through the rectum, flows down the legs. And it's got a healing quality. It is both cranial lymph and cranial sea. And the myelinating glial cells, they produce capillaries that produce more cranial sea, and that flows off in capillaries, keeping the environment of the cranial sea as it flows out through all of the nerves. So being aware of that big body of cranial sea like a bulb in your cerebellum. In the center of that bulb you have the thalamus. As the carbon dioxide moves towards it, it gets filtered out by the coryplexus, and then the thalamus gets fed this pure nutriment and heals. The pituitary gland gets all of that nourishment. The hypothalamus, the thalamus, pineal gland, it's all fed by that light and food. And dropping down into the cerebellum and pons, breathing with the holographic breathing and spreading out through the cranial nerves. And the whole spine, more nerves. The bottom of the spine is just nerves, spreading out through the whole body. A water body, the center of your body. I was going to say of your being, I guess your being hangs out there, is salt water. Notice the consciousness moving in that body of water. How that consciousness also connects to the higher energies, flows down through and out through all of the nerves. Allow it to heal. A lot around the lumbar spine, the lower back, let that fluid flow out through your lumbar spine. And breathe out through the hands and feet and legs. Just breathe with that, healing everything. A central body of water, salt water. So there's a stillness coming. Allow that stillness. It's kind of a meditative quality coming with that water at the minute. It's a bit like everything is stopping, allowing that to stop. It's gently breathing with the holographic breathing, allowing that stillness. You might feel some pulses through the brain as things start releasing. Allow, there's kind of this stillness dropping into the group. Allow that still point. Breathe gently. Especially around the throat, let the throat relax. There we go. Let the energies release through the brain. Now there's this energy running the other way, from the pelvis, from the sexual organs, through the spine, through the brain. Let your genitalia release. Let your pelvic floor release. And that energy rises up through this whole system, through the brain. The energies run both ways. The higher energies come in through the top. The sexual energies release and produce the motor and energies that rise up. Letting your genitalia release, letting that potency feed your body and feed your brain. Let that release. That will heal through everything. And just this pervasive stillness dawning. Allow that stillness. You may feel different areas of your spine releasing in that stillness. It's a bit like everything wants to rest. Allow everything to rest. This soft quality of kind of nothingness and stillness as you drop deeper into this energy layer by layer. And every layer you feel things releasing and letting go. Gently breathing with the holographic breathing, letting your brain go. Letting your spine go. And also allow yourself to be a channel. Let your throat go. Allow, in this stillness, allow yourself to listen to the higher intelligences. Let those higher intelligence talk with you. Again, letting the throat, a lot of this gets held in the throat, the communication with the higher energies. Let your throat relax. There we go. Letting the throat relax, the genitalia releases, and you get this communication. Let the shoulder blades relax. You get the opening through the top of the head, connection with the higher self. Gently breathing, everything becomes very subtle, very soft. And your whole organism becomes an organism for speaking with God. Allow yourself to listen to the beneficial energies, to the higher realms. And you are part of that. You are a reflection of that, and that is the upper part of you. Allow yourself to connect with the upper part of you as a channel. Gently breathing with the holographic breathing. Allow yourself to receive that communication. It may not be something you understand. It probably isn't something you understand. It's just arriving as an intelligence. Allow yourself to be with that intelligence, and very softly in the background your body is breathing with the holographic breathing. And there's this all-knowing intelligence that's informing your cells, informing the cranial sea. And the cranial sea is the center of us. It is the brain, it is the spine. It flows out, it becomes the body. All parts of it work together. They're not separate. It's one organism that talks to God. Gently breathing with the holographic breathing, allowing yourself to communicate with the heavens. Allowing yourself to sink and be on the earth, and the energies to travel through from the earth, through the sexual energies, through the body, and into the higher self, and letting the energies from the higher self and the intelligence to travel through you into the earth. Allow yourself to be a channel. Breathing gently. Some tiredness in people's throats and thyroids. Let the energy go through your throat, through your thyroid. That's it. Let your thyroid release in the top of your sternum, and this will release up through the face and brain. Gently breathing with the holographic breathing. Okay, we're going to come back in about a minute. Gently breathing. And sending a thank you to the earth. Sending a thank you to the higher self and the beneficial energies. And allowing the energy to go off for love and healing to the earth, for love and healing to the higher self and the beneficial energies. And allowing yourself to be loved and healed. And allowing the energies to go out to all sentient beings for love and healing. And you are the sentient being, allowing yourself to be loved and healed. And when you feel ready, gently allowing yourself to come back.